Our dear God, God in heaven, we want to thank you for this beautiful Sabbath day. As we come together in different parts of the world, we truly and gratefully do appreciate the technology that allows us to um, share a common space. I pray that you might be with me as I share what I've also been learning. And I pray that where we have questions, where we don't truly understand, that you might help us and you might guide us. Please be with those who are yet to join. I pray that they might also be able to understand at whatever point it is when they join. Thank you so much. In Christ's name we do pray, saying amen. Welcome everyone to today's lesson. Um, okay, today we want to touch upon, I think a recent, not too recent, I think maybe 2 weeks back, that the study that Elder Paminder did, which was on intergenerational wealth and the patriarchy. I haven't been here, so I haven't been able to like catch up. So I do hope no one has touched on it yet. Um, but if they have, I hope it's also like revision. Um, yeah, I hope it's also revision. And I thought to do this topic because if you remember when I came, was it last year? I think the first few topics we did together were on misogyny, like the patriarchy. We're just trying to break down what the patriarchy is and, looking at different perspectives, um, different principles that basically make up, the patriarchy, misogyny, all those things. So I thought it would be like a good, um, topic to continue those train of thoughts we had. Um, okay. So to start off, I would say, I'd remind us that I'll read a quotation, not a quotation, like a quote. Patriarchy has no gender. It is a system that reproduces itself. Um, if you remember, I'm not sure who was here or was not when we did do those studies for like a few months ago. But one important point that um we saw is how patriarchy is a system. It's a system of values, of norms, and structures. And those systems, if they persist through repetition, um, it continues to build upon, patriarchy. Um, okay, so patriarchy also teaches us, uh, we see like different concepts from patriarchy. So, for example, we see the issue to do with how men are taught to value things like ownership, provision, and legacy. But on the other hand, we have women who are being taught to value care, things like emotions, sacrifice, those other um other elements that are more leaned towards nurturing. And not only are they taught at home by your parents, maybe your grandparents, but you also see them being reinforced by families, schools, religion, and obviously the economy. So you start off at home, you have your parents. If you're a boy child, you're being told to, um, you know, not express yourself. You're being told to you know, grow up, not cry. And then you go to school, you are now associating with other children and you try to express yourself. And if you're playing in a group of like male friends, for example, you know, you start sharing certain ideas, and those ideas become part of your value, religion as well. And then later on in life, you start working, and we still see the system, uh, telling you to act in a certain way that makes you a man. So, out of all those different concepts that we learned, there are common things where we continue seeing patriarchy arising. We see it in different aspects of life, but some would include things like inheritance, which is something we're going to talk about today. Surnames, when you get married, are you gonna, do you want to keep your last name or do you want to take your husband's name? It's always been a debate in the world. You have family lineage as well. We'll talk about all these different aspects and how they apply, and quote unquote quote to say how things just work, whether it's at school or at work. Um, you will, most people will treat you in a certain way based on your gender. Okay. Um, just want to double check if I'm sharing my screen. Okay, give me one moment. But as I'm trying to connect, does anyone have questions so far? We're good? Mm,
Recording in progress.
okay, I think you should be able to see my screen now.
Yep, we can see that. Thank you.
Is it showing the whiteboard? Because I can only see my face.
Yes, it is showing the whiteboard and we can see you drawing on it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Um, okay. So moving forward, we want to look at um intergenerational wealth and the patriarchy. Also, just considering like all the other aspects that we have learned in the past. Okay, so what is intergenerational wealth? Like, how do you understand it? Hmm, anyone want to try?
Well, hello. Is it Tara? Is that how you pronounce your name?
Tari.
Tari? Yeah, yes. So the wealth is passed down from one generation to the next.
Okay, so we have wealth being passed down. from one generation to the next. Okay. Does anyone understand it in a different way? Okay, that's how I understand it as well. Okay, so for us to have a better understanding, we also need to understand how, okay, we basically said intergenerational wealth is passing down wealth from one generation to the next, meaning that there are different generations, and each generation has um its own way of thinking, so to say. So first off, the first generation would focus on is the baby boomers. If I'm not mistaken, um, this should be Gen X, if I'm not mistaken. I will double check this. Gen X. Okay. And then you have like the generation after that would which would probably be like my mom's generation. I think those are millennials. Gen Y. You know what? I don't remember. But these are like the millennials. Millennials. And then, the next generation, which is like my generation, Gen Z, and now we have Gen X. All right. So when you look at baby boomers, that's between the age of 1946 to around 1964. Does anyone know what time period this was? Which war period? Anybody? Okay, I'll give you a clue. Is it one or two? There's after World War One and two, pretty much. And then during this period, it was basically marked by things like Reconstruction, economic expansion. There's also like cheap land, affordable housing, and strong unions and population growth. So because there is also this demand for population growth, we see how um, there's more um there's more birth during this time. So what are we also I'm sorry, like my iPad keeps kicking me out. Okay. There's also substantial economic research where we see baby boomers accumulating significantly more wealth than later generations. Again, there was like cheap land, so you could get yourself cheap land. Um, you know, the environment was great for being able to expand economically, and the houses were actually like pretty, affordable as well. But then we look at Generation X and Generation Z. Okay, my bad. Yeah, Generation X and Generation Z, where if we compare them to baby boomers, they are more unlikely to achieve the same level of wealth due to structural economic changes. Like if you look at housing costs right now, like they're crazy, like they're off the roof. Um, Especially if we're gonna compare them to um like the wages people are getting, and we also factor in debt, and then we also factor in inflation. which is constantly fluctuating throughout the years, right? So if you compare those two generations, already there is like a huge difference in terms of what they could acquire. The baby boomers, they could acquire more, um, I would say with little, but now, even though like you could make a lot of money, or not like crazy amount, but like with the salaries people are getting, you still can't afford like the cost of living, you know. So that's something that's very important to note. Again, I'm sorry, I need to share my screen. I'm not sure why it's kicking me out. Okay, so we already have that difference. Okay, so we've defined what generational wealth is, and we saw how it's um wealth being passed down from one generation to the next. And we compared different generations that we have. Mostly baby boomers because of, the things they could acquire and the wealth they could acquire, and comparing them to like the recent generations, the difference. Okay. So we want to add another layer, and this is a different term, like different terminologies we could add in terms of understanding intergenerational wealth. Okay. So these terms would be old money and new money. Would anyone like to tell us the difference between old money and new money?
I can have a go.
Yes, please.
As far as I understand, old money would be money that's been passed down through the family, so it's inheritance type situation. New money would be money that you've basically earned yourself from your own endeavours. So I believe that's what.
Yes, thank you very much. Say own earnings. All right. Um, okay. So like when you make your own money, you don't really have anyone to I'll say control your wealth because it's yours at the end of the day. You decide what you want to do with it. But with old money, because it's being passed down from family, from one generation to the next generation, um, it requires I would say rules or an understanding of how to control where that money goes. Okay. So we want to understand the control that comes with um control of wealth. Okay. All right. So basically, we have a family. Okay, let me draw circles. Let's pretend they're families. Okay. So we have a family, and they have old money, right? So Whoopsie. Let's say this is the first generation. The first generation is obviously going to come to an end, and they're going to have to decide, like, oh, like, where are we going to put our money? Right? And there comes the second generation. Okay. So let's say the first generation is comprised of parents. The parents, they get married, they have, draw this better. Okay. They get married, they have kids. We have, let's say they have two kids. And assuming that we have a female child and a male child. Okay. Let's assume you're the first generation. I don't know who I'm going to pick. Let me go to Zoom. Um, does anyone want to try? Greg, let's say you're the first generation and you know your life is coming to its end. Um, who are you gonna pick to, what are you gonna do to pass down your wealth? What would you do in that scenario? Anyone would like to try?
It would depend on the children and how they are and what they're doing.
Okay, so, okay, these are options. Options. So Greg says who they are, who they are, and what they're doing. Okay. Would anyone else like to try? How are you gonna decide?
I
Character and
could make,
responsibility.
Yes, Lynn?
I was just going to say I could make a comment that
Mm-hmm.
a lot depends on what you mentioned rules. So with old money, there's usually family rules that would govern kind of or direct what you should be doing with that wealth. It would depend on, as Greg pointed out, to a point like, you know, how many children do you have? Are they male? Are they female? Who is going to most likely maintain that wealth within the family if that is the priority? One assumes that's a priority if that wealth has been passed down to this point. So therefore, one would potentially be making decisions about that in the context of how that was going to be best continued to stay within the family.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you very much. So there are always, like we've seen, there are always rules in which we have, oh we, in which people have to look at to decide how they're gonna pass down their wealth. And in most cases, we see how there always there's always one common factor, and that is knowing who is in the family, is in the family. Right. And in order to know who's in the family, um we use what is called, what am I saying? We use either, not either, we use surnames. And I know in different places they're called different things. Um, I call them a surname, then there's family name, and other things like that. So in order to determine who is in the family, you need to um, look at the family name. And I also see this playing out in different aspects in like other cultures. So for example, in Zimbabwe, when you're a child and for example, I have my dad's last name. When, when they're addressing you, you are apparently not you're not your mother's child. They basically say um you're not related to your mother, although she birthed you and you have her DNA. But the fact that you have your dad's last name, you're basically not considered a relative um to your mother's side. So we see how the last name has a really important um mechanism in terms of control. Okay. Um with that in mind, like the example I gave, like in Zimbabwe, um, you know, they're gonna consider your surname. Okay. But remember, we have two children. One is female and one is male. And you know how the storyline goes. You grow up, you go to school, um, back then in society, if they did choose to take you to school, if you're female, you work and eventually you want to get married. Okay, so now we're at marriage. The female, she's gonna get married. Let's assume she's heterosexual. She's gonna get married to um a male. But remember, okay, for emphasis, we'll do blue. Blue would be a different family. So she's gonna get married to a different family, to another male, and probably his last name is like Peter or something. You know, his last name is like Peter. And then the male child, let's assume his last name was Sunk. Okay. He's also gonna choose to get married, but he's getting married to a female, right? And what these two females have in common, unfortunately, uh, unfortunately, is they are both not gonna have their last names, their family names. But these two males, they're gonna keep their family name, right? So what we see is how the male lineage basically continues, right? Um, it's basically gonna continue. If these two decide to have kids of their own, these two decide to have kids of their own, the sons will always have the last name, and the daughters are always gonna get married to um a different family, and they're gonna have a different name. Okay, right. So I want to visualize this better. I don't know how to. Okay. So like we said, we have family A, then we have family B. Okay, great. Are we on the same page? Does it make sense so far?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we have a problem. Because remember, family A is coming from wealth. I mean, they have wealth. Family B also has wealth, right? Um, what happens if the female gets married off? What happens to her is that she loses her last name, right? Loses last name. So no more last name. But she's given a new name, new last name, right? So could we still associate her with this family? I mean, logically we should be, but anyways, would we still associate her with this family? Or would society still associate her with this family? Not really, right? So remember, one of the rules for inheritance is you have to have your family name. So automatically she's disqualified for that inheritance. And did it again. Okay. She's automatically disqualified for inheritance. And the only person who's left that qualifies for inheritance is the male, right? So these are like some of the ways in which we see um wealth distribution and like um the nuance of inheritance and wealth being passed down, right? Um, whilst we're still on this topic, I want to touch upon um other systems where we see, I'll say like the concept of patriarchy playing a part, not necessarily in terms of um intergenerational wealth, but I think it is important to see how it can look. It's been so normalized in different contexts. Um, it's been so normalized in different contexts, but those same principles still apply, or the system still rolls out in a similar way. Okay, so the first one I'd like to touch on is patrilineal inheritance. Okay, so we're looking
Before
at
you go
country.
on, Tari, just to
Yeah,
clarify, is that
yeah.
how it works in Zimbabwe? That if you're a female and you change your name, that disqualifies you from inheritance?
Yes. And not just your last name, but if you're just female in general, you're disqualified.
Ah, it's not how it works here.
Okay.
I think if we've been watching even the controversy over the Murdoch family and the
Yeah.
succession, and the girls still qualified for inheritance.
Inheritance. Okay. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
So you don't lose that with the name, but it may be like that in other countries.
Okay. So I think I'll also touch on maybe some parts that I'm going to touch on might cover other places. Just let me know. Okay, so we have, oh, thank you for that point as well. Okay, so we have the patrilineal inheritance. So we look at places like Europe, China, like South Asia, the Middle East, and some parts of Africa. And basically, how it works is you have wealth, things like wealth, land, and title deeds. I think that's what they're called. They're mostly passed through the male line. So I guess that's what I was mentioning. So whether you are a daughter, even if it's like your parents, um, you share the same parents, but the fact that you are um a female child, you either receive less or mostly nothing. And sons get to inherit most of the wealth, land, or like the title deeds. Again, we see how this is more of mostly attached to male lineage, and it ensures that the wealth, most of it or all of it, is passed down through to the male child. Okay. You also see how women are treated as temporary members of their birth family, which is quite sad when I think about it, because um you have your birth family where when you are when you're born, you expect them to be your family, but as soon as you're married, you are kind of just like chugged away. You're now like your family, your only family is like your husband. And then you have like African cultures where you've already lost your actual family, and then the family you're married into, they also treat you very poorly, and they don't count your children as your family as well, you know. Um, yeah, so we see how it reinforces the idea that men um carry the family legacy, so to say. Okay, another example is patrilocal marriage. This is when women have to move to their husband's family. Mostly we see this in countries like China and India. And women have to basically um, leave their home after marriage, where I guess they were born. Um, and we also see how in those societies, investing in your daughter is seen as a loss of wealth, um, because at the end of the day, they're saying once you get married, you're going to, uh, I guess, not be a part of us. So to them, it's like a loss of wealth. And in this kind of situations, they mostly prioritize um, their son's education and also the son's inheritance. Okay. Um, okay. And then we also have the dowry system. I think most of us are familiar with this one. Again, we see it in parts of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Africa, most parts in Africa. And for those who are not familiar, it's more of a how do you call this? Um, Basically, it depends with which part you're from. In other cultures, it's the groom's family that brings wealth to the to the bride's family. And so it's kind of an exchange, I guess, like butter trade. And then in other cultures, it's the bride's family that gives money to the groom's family. But either way, um, we see how there's still an element of control. Um, because wealth and it's the issue of wealth and power where the groom's family is saying, we are wealthy enough to afford your child, to have your child. Or the wealth, if it's the family, the bride's family that's transferring money to the groom, it's more of wealth flowing to toward male controlled households, you know. And either way, women rarely retain the ownership of any dowry that they get. I know like of cases where um like the women are left with nothing, even though the groom's family has paid like thousands of dollars. The money still goes either to the father, and if your father is not there, you have even if your mother is there, the money will go to your uncles. It's not gonna go to your mom or your aunt. It always goes, if one male person can take it, then they pass it down to the next. They don't really care if you're close or not close to that person, as long as to them it makes sense that it's being passed down to um males. Um, okay. And then we also have um the type of inheritance where predominantly the son inherits everything. So that could be land owning families. We have mostly it's done for, I guess, preserving estates and political power and I don't know, patriarchy. So they just give it to their sons. Um, and most of the time their daughters are excluded. We have, again, f family wealth becomes a more male-controlled institution. Um,
Tari,
yes.
um, is the root cause of patriarchy economic? Is
Is it
that like,
economic?
well, seems to be it, if you go back, like I'm just listening to everything you're saying, obviously
Mm-hmm.
listen to Albert Parminder's presentation as well.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to like, if you go back and back and back and back and back all the way to
Mm-hmm.
farming,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like the distribution of wealth because
Okay.
of women birthing and men were working on farms. Is that what caused patriarchy in the first place?
Mm, okay. How I
Wealth,
understand it.
wealth and or economic.
Okay. How I understand it, if anyone has another answer, let me know. But how I understand it is, um, I guess, yes, you do see the issues of economics playing a part, but the root cause, the way I see it, is an issue of control. And I feel like one of the ways in which you can control someone is through economics. Um, so I wouldn't necessarily say it's the economics is the root cause, but I would say it's like a tool to power being used, which is the actual root of the problem, be wanting to control someone. I don't know. That's what I think. Anyone else would like to give it a shot? Anybody? No.
It's not really an answer. It's just an observation in response to what you're saying here is that the female doesn't really have an identity and she's not her own. So it's always control, and that she is there for a particular purpose and she must fulfill that role according to the expectation of a society, within a culture that she's coming from.
Thank you so much for that.
What about the assumption that parents have to pass down their wealth to the next generation, regardless of male or female? Has that got its roots in patriarchy?
That is a great question.
When you've got
Mm.
the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, a lot of that has to do with old money, Trump being a case in point. And the rich make sure that that money stays in the family. So that it just creates a huge divide. Because if you've got generational wealth, you've also got generational debt, where children can inherit the sins of their parents. I would say that, not literally.
Thank you for that. Does anyone want to add to that or anything else that's been said? Okay. If not, I want to it's for me to understand as well, so I hope you don't mind me asking. And I'm going to okay, the notes I have here. And Elder Terry, in reference to when you're speaking about Australia and how it works, I want to understand if it's similar or it's like different. Okay, so the other point I had was legal barriers to women owning property. So for me, that looks like yes, women can own property. You're not disqualified from owning property. But then you have cases of married women, like you're married and you're not able to own property independently, or perhaps your property is controlled by your father or your husband, um, like something like that. And women can still, women cannot basically accumulate wealth, I would say, like on their own. They always need like someone, like a second party, third party, when it comes to them owning property or wealth. Is that similar or it's completely different from the experience in Australia?
think it sounds a bit different.
Okay.
My understanding is that, yeah, there's no restrictions.
Okay.
A woman, even if she's married, can own property in her own name.
Okay.
Can I just add, though, I think it did used to be like that, like quite a long time ago. So I think that's changed, as Catherine pointed out, but I believe it was like that fairly long time ago. I'm not sure when.
That might have been right up until the 60s, actually.
The 60s.
Yeah, that sounds very possible.
All right, that's very insightful. Thank you so much. I will do more research. Okay. Okay. I guess the last point I'd like to touch on, in terms of like the different systems that we see is in terms of religious inheritance. If you look at, for example, Islamic inheritance, mostly it's the sons that receive the largest shares, and mostly when it comes to such inheritance, it's always justified by divine order, so to say. That's how they justify it. And gender inequality is then framed as moral stability. Okay. All right, so those are a few examples that I have that also just tied into intergenerational wealth. So with all those examples that we looked at, we see that there are common patterns. What are the common patterns that we observed? Okay, I'll give the first one, which would be we have control of land. Um, is there anything else you observed?
Sorry, are you still there?
Yes.
Huh.
That's the job. That's freezing.
Is your question, what are some of the themes we see through those different models that you described?
Yes.
Like just different features of it?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like the identity of the woman in a lot of those scenarios is kind of like non-existent, right? If they're getting almost like something to be owned and passed around and not really having their own name and identity.
John can't hear you. Big voice.
Oh, and money. Yeah, so
Money, okay. Let me share. Okay, so we have the identity of the woman. Kind of invisible, I guess. And not as important. Money. Anything else that you noted? Okay, those are good ones. Okay. I'll also note inheritance laws. I guess like I've learned today that they're different from different families' inheritance laws. But I would say, especially back then, that it was heavily reliant on if you are considered to be part of the family or not. But I think also with time, you have different ways in which people choose to give their inheritance or the rules they put around who gets their inheritance. All right. So, having said that, I'm gonna go back real quick. Okay. So we basically saw how the system of inheritance typically would follow the male lineage. And um meaning the family name would be passed down through the men, and then wealth would typically follow the men. Um, okay. Um, all right. So going back to our story, um, if we're to look back at families like the generation of baby boomers, remember our key point, not our key point, but like one of our points and why they are one of like, the wealthiest generations is how they're able to acquire land because acquiring a piece of land for them was cheap, right? And it's a great means of production. So looking at that generation, we see how they have, for example, farming societies. So if you have a piece of land, right? You have your piece of land and you want to pass it down to um the next generation. You want to pass it down to the next generation. What are you going to consider when passing it down? Remember here, land was a good form of wealth, also inheritance. Anyone want to try?
Primary question is how do you keep it within the family? It's the same question you started with.
Yes.
That's your primary goal. So how do we do that? That would be the question they would ask.
That is very true. Um,
Or are you thinking of something else?
no. That's correct. Yes. I'm trying to skim through my notes, but thank you for the point. Okay, so yes, you would consider the how aspect, the how, the who. Um, who are you who are you going to pass down the land to? Um, okay. So remember we're looking at land. We have land, we have different forms of wealth. We have land, money, we have property. When we're looking at land, we're now looking at a specific, I guess, one of the ways in which it is naturally easy for people to incorporate inequality. So they would consider that, first of all, it's agriculture. And
Can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
Are you sort of trying to get to the fact of they would also, aside from the wealth factor, they'd also consider who is able to look after that land and work that land, especially if it's agriculture, then it's not just the wealth per se, it's also the ability to manage that physically and any other way. And I guess historically speaking, men have been the ones traditionally to work that land physically, whereas women haven't so much. So therefore, that would be another factor that perhaps people would consider. Is that what you're getting?
Yes, thank you very much. That was well put. I apologize. I have 0 hours of sleep, so my brain is really slow. But yeah, that is exactly the point I am trying to get to. Okay, so it's agriculture, and you consider basically what Lynn said. I hope that's correct. You're going to consider who's able to farm the land, who's able to take care of it, and naturally, that is leading towards inequality. And okay, it's leading to inequality, and you are basically perpetuating the patriarchy system through that form of inheritance. Okay. So I guess having had looked at those different aspects, I
Can I make a
want,
comment
yeah.
as well? Like, it seems like a bit of an old-fashioned idea, but do we see that it still sort of happens today? Like, even we're not in agricultural society, but
Mhm.
you can have a couple that are working or whatever, and then if the woman's going to get pregnant or have children and stuff like that, they're going to make decisions based on economic decisions, you know, which could perpetuate patriarchy, even though they don't want to. But you know, there'll be a financial cost, say, if they try to make decisions based around equality, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Like, it'd be easy to slip into this again, even today. Just because, you know, with pregnancy, breastfeeding and all that, it can, or even men just getting paid higher wages generally anyway. More likely to get promotions and things like that.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think these pressures still exist, I guess what I'm trying to say, even though it's not so obvious.
Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
I think these pressures sort of still exist today, even though it's not as obvious as the scenarios we're looking here with, you know, farming. But I think it's a bit more discreet, but these pressures still happen. And there's economic cost when we really want to follow equality. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, Lynn.
I'll just add to that as well. I think like that's a really good point that Catherine just made, because it definitely impacts society in many ways and negatively for women. Certainly financially, the government is acknowledging that to some degree, and there are ways to counteract that now, but many people don't avail themselves of that because of their traditional perspectives of what they think men and women should and shouldn't be able to do. I've certainly seen some examples, not a lot, but I have seen some examples where a couple will manage that quite well, given given the fact that the woman is going to actually give birth and then breastfeed potentially for a period of time, but she still works, and so they work it out between them so that it becomes more equitable. And I have seen that happen. I just don't think it happens anywhere near enough, and society probably doesn't promote that enough. And even with agriculture, there's some really good examples of women who make great farmers, and they literally, even on their own, they can run big cattle stations and other farming activities. And it's really, at its core, a cultural issue, so that for the most part, males are going to be brought up with this perspective, and women and females, children are going to be brought up with the long established cultural norms. It's harder to break those cultural perspectives, I guess, and this is where society and governments need better education and more change, and often it doesn't happen as much as you'd like. But anyway, that was just my thoughts.
All right, thank you so much for those points. They're very useful and insightful, and that's basically what we were trying to get to. I think firstly, I guess always the point of the studies is to be able to see the principles. Some principles we can firmly grasp them when we look at, how things were run in the earlier days. But what's important is being able to pick those up currently. So I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, so like was mentioned before, we see how in all these different reasons, I'll say, in which the inheritance was passed down, you see how I don't want to say it was done for a good reason, but you see that their reasoning was so that they could continue benefiting economically. So in terms of the daughter being married into a different family, when the wealth is, if the wealth was passed down to the daughter, it means the daughter would take that wealth with her, right? As she settles into the new family. And for the family that has, I would say, given away their daughter, to them it seems like a loss, right? Same applies to agriculture. With agriculture, we have, it's a lot of work, obviously, but you also have would consider the daughter, the the daughter, um, she remember it was like back then, get married, and I don't know if birth control was a thing, but then they would have children, and society would still expect her to, take care of the children, nurture the children. And now there's no one taking care of the land, the property. So again, for them, that was financially, economically responsible to pass it down to the son, right? So you can see how the reasoning is mostly to say, I guess, to make sure that economically they're okay. But if we look at it from the perspective that we have, yes, you're going to be economically okay, financially wealthy, but we can't deny the fact that there is that patriarchy that still is embedded in whatever way um they pass down the inheritance. And again, like mentioned, we see it being passed down. Sorry, my bad. You see it in different forms, uh, at work or at school, and the family. If you're married, if you're a couple, and you have a child, deciding who goes to work at the end of the day, who's gonna make more money. And society normally favors, men. Yeah, so those are basically the different ways in which we see patriarchy playing a part in society. So, okay. Um, all right. I'm not gonna lie. I My brain keeps getting stuck because I literally do not sleep. So I'm gonna end here where I say something that does not make sense. I'll give a summary. Okay, so we did a brief review of what we've done, I think last year, if I remember well. How about patriarchy and how we see that it's a system that persists through repetition. Um, the more we do it, the more it's just going to continue. Yeah, we basically looked at how the issue of men and women, how they're raised up, and how that later affects young adults or adults in general. We have our main focus was to see patriarchy through the lens of wealth, because wealth is a power, I don't know, it's a power source. You see how with wealth you have power. And if you remember when we spoke about patriarchy, we spoke of how there is that aspect of power. So there is mostly our point. Our first point, we touched on intergenerational wealth. And then we touched on intergenerational wealth across like different cultures just to be able to see how it plays out in like different places in the world. Because I always feel like it's very interesting to me personally just to be able to see how, you know, it's so different in like other parts of the world. So we touched on that, and just to hammer our point being, the aspect where we see uh the power play of um patriarchy still playing a huge part in financial decisions, but you can't deny the fact that it's there and it's very prominent. Yeah. I don't know if there are any questions or comments, corrections. Um, Please do let me know. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I can't help thinking of the inheritance that was given to the Israelites They inherited land, and they were to value that inheritance. And I know it was all based on patriarchy, as far as that they were 12 sons, and 11 of them anyway got land as an inheritance. And they were to keep it in the family. But inevitably, some would do well and some wouldn't. But God put in place a system where every 7 years and then every 49 years, there was a redistribution of wealth. So somehow, in not following that plan, they've ended up being cursed. They've ended up with a king. They've created a whole heap of problems. So, I think of, so many people have been offering the idea of clearing student debt and things like that, just clearing the slate, giving people the opportunity to start again. And when you don't do that, you just end up with generational problems. So this idea of inheritance is I think we do well to think about it a bit more, and just what God had intended and how it went wrong.
Yeah. Does anyone else have a comment? I heard two voices earlier. I can't really tell who the
I
other
was
one was.
I was just going to say, even though in Australia it hasn't, like we have had, women's have had the same rights as men for buying land and so forth, as you were talking about earlier. I think that that mindset was still lingering, at least in my family, because when I look back and I think how I grew up, the mindset was, oh, don't worry, you'll marry someone and they'll look after you. You don't have to worry too much about, looking after yourself. And as that sounds absolutely so ignorant looking back on it. And yet that's how I thought when I was a teenager. And then you get into marriages that don't work. And then you don't have anybody that says to you, you need to buy something, you need to go and buy a house, you need to save up. Now you're out working, go and there was never any form of advice to just how I could have done it so much better than what I did do when I was younger. I think that it is just a reflection of what was before me. Even though there was that freedom, there was still the other mindset was still lingering on. At least in my family, I don't know if that's general for other people or whether it was just isolated for me. But definitely when I look back on so many opportunities that I could have taken, so many times when people in my family could have advised me differently, they didn't. And it's not until now I look back and I just go, my goodness, if I'd only tried a bit harder, I could have done more than what I've done. So so that's my point. For me at least, it has lingered, that mindset.
That's interesting. Thank you so much for sharing.
There's a question in the chat, but I don't know who it is. Who's Zoom user? Is that you, Josephine? Or is that Wally? Or Molly? Not Wally. Who's written in the chat? Maybe you could put in the chat who you are, so we can just address your name.
It is me. It's me, Ilderteri.
Ah, Wally, thank you. So Wally wants to keep it in the family.
Okay, that is interesting.
No, he's asked the question, if the primary goal of intergenerational wealth is to keep wealth within the family, isn't it easy to do it through allowing marriage between siblings or close relatives? but that was not the case. Anyone have thought, comment on this? Does anybody want to comment on Wally?
I've seen some history, like where that actually was done for that purpose. Certainly wasn't common practice by most people's, habits, I suppose. And I'm assuming that in part the reason that doesn't happen, there has been historically evidence to suggest that scientifically, even biologically, that becomes a detrimental problem, a problem. And so there have been indications of or instances where that has played out with various negative impacts on the health of their progeny. But aside from that, I think maybe from cultural and religious perspectives, I mean, I'm not sure how long or how far back. I mean, if you go right back to Adam and Eve, one assumes that they did actually intermarry with their siblings to start with, at least. And perhaps because the gene pool was a lot more pure at that point, maybe that didn't have the negative impacts. So, over time, things developed differently, I guess, for the majority of society, at least.
Yeah, I was going to say, as well as in terms of biology, I think in terms of biology, mostly that's where you would see a lot of harm with the genes, and how I haven't done like a deep research on it, but I know there are some studies that mention how if you inherit, you're basically inheriting like 50% of both of your parents, and you both have like similar genes or the same genes, and that has a negative biological effect on people. So yeah, I think in terms of biology, that's what I'll have to say. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on it.
I think I agree with what Lynn said as well. Oftentimes they've tried to do this as much as they can, maybe marrying cousins or two rich families that are both wealthy will marry siblings with each other's families so they can kind of keep the wealth within those families, within that class structure. Royal families across the world will, closely related, the Russian dynasty and the other European dynasties, you see the same genetic pool there. I think there was some genetic problems too. And then we have the example in Egypt as well, where they did try siblings marrying at least once. So it has been done. But if it's not direct family, it might be other elite families as well, or powerful families. Marriages were often about power and wealth and things in times gone by, I think. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Molly, have you been answered, or does it help?
All right, thank you. Just when I pose a question in Google, it gave me 3 reasons, and two of the reasons are actually what you have just said. Social taboo, genetic risk. The first one, social taboo. Second one, genetic risk. And the third one is says Western mark effect, which means close associations during childhood usually prevent sexual attraction between siblings. I don't know whether these are the answers or not.
Wally, you said social taboo, genetic
Yes.
risk. What was the
Yes.
third one? Say the third one again.
The first one is social taboo. Second
Yeah.
one is genetic risk. These two
Genetic
are,
risk.
you have said. And the third one is Western mark effect. I don't know whether I pronounced it rightly or not. Western mark effect.
Can you type it in the chat?
All right.
What the third one is? We're not catching it. Western
mark effect. Let me type it down for you. Western mark effect.
Also, Wally, sorry for mispronouncing your name. I thought it was Wally.
Westermark effect. Okay, explain that one. What's Westermark effect?
It says Western mark effect is close association during childhood usually prevent sexual attraction between siblings.
Oh, that's when you think you love your cousin.
Yeah, it says this effect, it prevents sexual attraction due to close association during childhood between siblings.
It's actually the opposite, Terry.
The opposite, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
yep.
It's saying because they have so much close association, probably arguing over everything, they don't tend to be sexually attracted. It creates more of an aversion to each other in that regard. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think we're all nodding.
Yeah.
Thank you. We've learned something. I mean, we've learned a lot today, but yeah, very good. Thank you, Wally.
Thank you so much. Okay. Is there time for more questions, or I can close?
I just wanted to make one more comment. We talked a lot about the what do they call it? Patrilineal. I don't know if anybody's read Angela Saini's book. Can't remember what it was called, but she talks about there's a few matrilineal societies as well in the past. And so her research showed that there were these cultures here and there. But what I noted, I guess, the same theme we have, that it's still going to, I think, trying to keep the inheritance within the families. They just use a different structure to do that. I just wanted to raise that there have been some. And so, but they've still probably been some kind of it would work in a similar way, I think, in terms of controlling wealth.
Which tells me that the cause of patriarchy is wealth. If it's not patriarchy, that tells me then if it's not just patriarchy. Oh, if it's not just it applies to matriarchy or patriarchy. So what triggers it has to be this wealth thing going on. Well, think about how did it all start? Where did it all start? What actually happened
Brendan,
back then? Yeah.
Couldn't you equally say that control is still, like, they want to control the wealth? I mean, you can certainly see how wealth would play a huge part, but control. Sorry?
No, you're right. Keep going.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, I think that control is still likely one of the major factors. I mean, certainly they want to keep the wealth, and so therefore they want to, because that gives them power, which we've discussed. So it basically creates a situation, and I think it is like you point out, a very big factor involved. I still think control is probably the key, and maybe even you could even say selfishness to a point, but control over resources and everything else. Sorry, go ahead.
Why do people want control?
Basically selfishness, isn't it? Like if you go right back to how that developed before sin, there was an element of equality. After sin, that was put out of balance, and then it was a case of, survival of the fittest, so to speak. So that's kind of how it's developed. I don't know. I think selfishness is all I can think.
My question is, if I was to think about what Elder Parminder spoke about, can't remember when, over the past 6 weeks, people just, ultimately, human beings just want an awesome life, period. So how do you get an awesome life? And then, well, that looks like I need to have lots of stuff and to have my life easy, so I'm not wrecking my body to live. So therefore, for me and my family, the people I care about most, for me to have the best life I can, I need to generate wealth. Well, how do I do that? Well, I try and control stuff. So if you're trying to control stuff, why are you trying to control stuff? Because you want wealth. So the more I think about it, the more all this patriarchy stuff comes all the way back to economic stability for human beings.
You get to make the decisions when you've got the money.
Big voice.
You get to make the decisions when you've got wealth. You're not being controlled. You can control.
Yeah. It's worth saying.
When you've got wealth, then you've got the decision making. So when you can make decisions, and you've got the control. So no one else can control you. In a way. So yeah, I agree.
So why are people selfish? For what purpose? What's the point of being selfish? Because you want a better life, isn't it? Ultimately, if you strip it all away.
You shall be as gods.
Yeah,
which means I need to grab stuff to make my life easier. And so you just try and keep going down that path. And it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you've got slaves and you're dominating women. It just gets. That's my opinion. Like that, as soon as Catherine said what she said, whether it works in a patriarchal society, well, hang on, the same thing happened in a matriarchal society where women were controlling everything. Therefore, patriarchy isn't the origin.
But it's the curse.
It's the curse. But what triggered the curse?
I think Elder Terry mentioned wanting to be as gods, yeah? And isn't that control and wealth, if you like? Because God owns everything. If you're as God, you own everything, you control everything. So maybe that's the key. I don't know.
Maybe it's people forget that their happiness relies on the happiness of the broader society, and that we work as like a big network. When they lose sight of that and fight for their individual rights, they end up hurting themselves, because we all live together. Our happiness is communal. So we have to make individual sacrifices sometimes, and it ends up bringing happiness back to us. And it might be just a mistake in thinking.
Which is why we're getting redirected to institutions. We're saved as a group, not as individuals.
Yeah. We'll all be happier if we're all following rules to protect each other's rights, not just our own right to have what we want.
So we're one big family then.
Yeah.
So we're all wealthy.
So it's a little bit like the old saying that says no one's an island, because really everything we do has an impact on others, even if we think it doesn't. We often will do things that we think doesn't really impact anybody else, and yet those things that we do will have some ramification, if not in the short term, in the long term, on others, often those closest to us, but not only the closest to us, but it's like the ripple effect, yeah? So
Could it be like the first sin of Satan or Lucifer? When Christ was introduced, Satan's thought was, I want, I will, I can. And then in the Bible it says, I will be like the Most High, I will be, the King of the North. So the first sin basically was I.
God says I am.
If in the event that all this stuff happened because of wealth and power, however you want to call it, and that's what triggered patriarchy, hypothetically, I'm not saying, if that works out to be true, well, then wouldn't, at the end of the world, the great controversy be the same subject? Wouldn't that how it wraps up?
So on that thought, Tari, you're a legend. You've reviewed something that was we need to go over. You've created discussion, which will continue on here, I'm sure, once we close down. And I know you're tired. Appreciate I hope everyone appreciates the effort you went to present for us today. The importance of being on the roster and fulfilling your duties has not gone unnoted. Thank you so much. Tari, would you like to close in prayer so we can let you have a little rest?
All right, let us pray. Dear God, thank you for being with us as we studied and we asked questions. We know there is still so much that we want to understand, and I do pray that you might lead us to that understanding. I pray for everyone in Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, and our friends that are scattered all over the world. Be with them as they start their Sabbath, as they end their Sabbath, and as they start their new week. Bless them. We thank you, dear God. We pray this, saying amen. Okay. Thank you so much for participating. I learned a lot. I wish I could be there for the discussion, but I'm gonna sleep. All right, take care.
Thank you,
Fill you
Tari.
in.
Thank you.
Yeah,
All
Everybody
right.
like to
thank
turn
you
on their
very
video.
much.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.